There was a man who faced the mirror each morning not from affection but from fear of what might surface if he looked away. He moved through life with deliberate elegance, clothes precise, posture intentional, every gesture refined. To others he appeared impressive, enviable, even intimidating. Doors opened, attention followed, yet when night came and the rooms fell silent, the quiet felt unbearable. Without an audience, he felt hollow. Praise never reached the place that ached. This is the contradiction at the heart of narcissism. Outward confidence sheltering inward fragility. Brilliance hiding terror of being ordinary. Narcissism is often mistaken for excessive self-love, but that view misses its core. It is rarely about loving the self too much. More often, it grows from not loving the self at all. It is a strategy, a mask built to protect against the fear of not being enough. The narcissistic mind does not rest in self-admiration. It searches other faces for proof of worth. Approval becomes currency. Attention becomes oxygen. They are attached not to who they are, but to who they appear to be when admired. In smaller doses, this hunger is familiar. The urge to check reactions, to shape stories so they sound stronger than they feel, to measure value through response. Most people experience this occasionally. For the narcissist, it becomes a permanent state. Validation is not a want, but a need. Their inner life revolves around it. To understand them, labels are not enough. Clinical definitions speak of grandiosity, craving admiration, limited empathy. Living as a narcissist feels like existing inside transparent walls. You are constantly visible, constantly evaluated. When exposure feels dangerous, you cover the glass with spectacle. The display distracts others from noticing the emptiness you fear lies underneath. Many narcissistic patterns begin early. Some children are raised on relentless praise, treated as exceptional before they know themselves. Others are overlooked, noticed only when they achieve. Both learn that love arrives with conditions. Approval must be earned. Safety depends on performance. The child adapts by building a persona that cannot be ignored. As adulthood unfolds, that persona hardens. Applause increases, satisfaction thins. Praise feeds the image but bypasses the core. The more they receive, the more they need. Being close to such a person can feel draining. Beneath the behavior is not cruelty but survival. What looks like arrogance is armor. Many narcissistic individuals experience intense self-focus in social settings. Their attention loops inward. How am I seen? Am I admired? Am I dismissed? From the outside, they may seem relaxed or charismatic. Inside, the performance never stops. If insecurity runs so deep, why do narcissistic personalities often rise to prominence? The answer lies in what society rewards. Confidence commands attention. Boldness dominates space. In cultures that prize visibility, those who amplify themselves rise quickly. Narcissists grasp this instinctively. Success, however, carries a cost. Real intimacy requires vulnerability. For the narcissist, such openness feels unsafe. The mask stays on. Relationships suffer. They long for closeness yet distrust it unless it arrives as admiration. They want love but fear being fully known. This tension creates cycles. Intensity followed by withdrawal. Charm replaced by distance. They want closeness without exposure, devotion without surrender. At the center lies an old injury, a sensitive core that governs behavior. Seen clearly, narcissism appears less monstrous and more tragic. It is not born of malice but adaptation. A child once learned that being ordinary was unsafe. A fortress was built. Over time, it became a prison. Narcissism also reflects the culture around it. A world obsessed with image and display encourages performance over presence. Lives are edited before they are shared. Value is counted in attention. This is why studying narcissism matters. It is not only about diagnosing others, it invites self-examination. Where do we perform instead of exist? Where do we seek admiration rather than connection? The narcissist becomes a mirror. Behind every maintained exterior is a story of fear and longing. Understanding does not mean tolerating harm. Boundaries remain essential, but understanding replaces confusion with clarity. The question remains whether change is possible. The mask protects and confines. Removing it feels dangerous. Keeping it ensures loneliness. Change begins when the pain of pretending outweighs the fear of exposure. Sometimes this arrives through loss, sometimes through careful therapeutic work. Progress is fragile. To soften armor is to reopen the wound that required it. Still, change can happen, not by erasing ego but by humanizing it. By learning that worth does not depend on spectacle. This is not a journey toward greatness but toward enoughness. Narcissism reveals something universal. Most people carry smaller masks and quieter fears of being unseen. The difference is scale. To love a narcissist is often disorienting. Early connection can feel intoxicating. Gradually, imbalance appears. Attempts at closeness meet resistance. It feels like reaching for something that fades when touched. Seen clearly, this is not a game but a defense. They learned early that love required performance. Explanation does not excuse harm, but it replaces confusion with understanding. From this understanding come lessons. Empathy without self-betrayal. Awareness that strength is not in vulnerability but honesty. That being known matters more than being admired. Imagine meeting the mirror without rehearsal. No demand for perfection. A quiet recognition that says, I am enough. That moment would be freedom. The paradox is clear. Those who crave love most fiercely often block its arrival. Defenses built to prevent rejection also prevent connection. This is human. Narcissism is a portrait of the struggle between appearance and authenticity, between fear and longing, between mask and self. The challenge ahead is not only recognizing narcissism in others, but noticing where we hide, where we polish instead of heal. Because beneath every performance lies the same desire, to be seen without acting, to be loved without earning, to be human and still enough. This awareness invites courage, patience, humility, and a willingness to choose connection over applause, presence over performance, truth over illusion. Change rarely arrives gently. For someone built around protection, it usually comes as a fracture. Something collapses that admiration once kept standing. A relationship ends without applause. A career stalls. A face in the mirror looks tired rather than powerful. In these moments, the narcissistic structure begins to tremble. What once worked no longer delivers relief. The performance exhausts more than it sustains. This is often the first encounter with an unfamiliar emotion. Despair without an audience. When admiration fades, many narcissistic individuals experience a profound emptiness. Not sadness alone, but disorientation. Without reflection from others, identity feels unstable. Who am I if no one is watching? This question terrifies because it exposes how much of the self has been outsourced. The inner world was never meant to stand alone. It was designed to be echoed. This collapse is sometimes mistaken for growth, but it is only the opening. Without guidance, the response may be rage, denial, or deeper retreat into fantasy. The mind searches desperately for new mirrors. Yet if the individual pauses long enough, something unusual can occur. They may feel the original wound directly, stripped of costume. This encounter is painful, but it is also honest. Therapeutic work with narcissism moves slowly for this reason. The goal is not confrontation, but containment. If the mask is torn away too quickly, the person may shatter or harden further. Progress happens when safety replaces spectacle, when the individual learns they can exist without performing. This is not taught through praise or criticism, but through steady presence. One of the hardest lessons is learning the difference between attention and care. Attention is stimulating but unstable. Care is quieter and demands reciprocity. Narcissistic patterns favor attention because it can be controlled. Care requires vulnerability. To receive it, one must allow themselves to be affected by another person. That openness once felt dangerous. Empathy is often discussed as something narcissists lack, but this is misleading. Many can understand others intellectually. What is impaired is emotional resonance. Their own feelings dominate awareness, leaving little space to absorb another's experience. As self-focus softens, empathy often grows naturally. This softening challenges long-held beliefs. The belief that worth must be proven, that admiration equals love, that strength means never needing anyone. Letting go of these ideas feels like losing protection, yet clinging to them keeps the wound open. Vulnerable narcissism illustrates this clearly. These individuals may appear humble or withdrawn, but internally they remain preoccupied with evaluation. They fear exposure as much as grandiose types fear insignificance. Both forms orbit the same center, a fragile sense of self. Relationships become the testing ground for change. Genuine intimacy reveals patterns quickly. When admiration is replaced by mutuality, discomfort arises. The old script no longer applies. Some retreat, others experiment with honesty. This experimentation feels clumsy. The person may overshare, withdraw, then return. For partners, this phase can be confusing. Boundaries are essential. Compassion does not mean self-sacrifice. Growth cannot occur if one person absorbs all the pain. Healthy connection requires balance. This is often where cycles break. Either both adapt or separation occurs. Culturally, narcissistic traits continue to be rewarded. Visibility still outweighs depth. Speed still beats reflection. This makes inner work harder. The environment constantly invites return to performance. Resisting this pull requires intention. The rise of digital identity complicates matters further. Online selves can be curated endlessly. Feedback is immediate and quantified. For someone vulnerable to validation hunger, this becomes an accelerant. The mirror never turns off. Yet cracks appear even here. Burnout, anxiety, and loneliness rise alongside visibility. The cost of constant self-presentation becomes clear. Many feel unseen despite exposure. Being watched is not the same as being known. Philosophically, narcissism raises an old question. What is the self without witnesses? A self built entirely from reflection dissolves in isolation. Authentic identity must have an internal anchor. Developing that anchor is the quiet work. It involves tolerating ordinariness, accepting limits, allowing flaws to exist without correction. For the narcissistic mind, this feels like surrender. In truth, it is stabilization. As this work progresses, shame often surfaces, not performative shame, but grief. Grief for years spent chasing approval. Grief for relationships damaged. This stage is delicate. Without support, shame can trigger regression. Humility is not humiliation. It is accurate self-perception. Seeing strengths and weaknesses together. No inflation, no erasure. This balance allows real connection. Change is rarely complete. Narcissistic tendencies may remain, especially under stress. But awareness alters response. Instead of acting automatically, there is pause. Choice replaces compulsion. The mask becomes optional. This transformation does not make someone extraordinary. It makes them present. Capable of listening without scanning. Capable of giving without calculating return. Capable of receiving care without demanding proof. For observers, this journey challenges stereotypes. Narcissists are not fixed caricatures. They are people shaped by early environments and reinforced by culture. Ultimately, the work of narcissism returns to a simple truth. No one heals by being admired. Healing comes from being met, seen in imperfection and still accepted. The question then extends beyond individuals. What kind of society are we building? One that multiplies mirrors or one that fosters presence? The answer begins privately. In moments when we choose honesty over image, when we resist exaggeration, when we allow silence. Narcissism loses power when attention is no longer currency, when connection becomes the measure. In the end, the narcissistic struggle teaches a universal lesson. Identity cannot survive on reflection alone. It needs grounding. It needs relationship without spectacle. This courage is quiet. It does not announce itself. It grows through small acts of authenticity. And when this courage takes root, something unexpected happens. The hunger eases. The mirror softens. The self becomes real. In that reality, value no longer rises and falls with attention. It stabilizes inside experience itself. Life becomes less about being impressive and more about being present with others, moment by moment, without rehearsal, without defense, without the exhausting demand to prove worth constantly. As the inner structure begins to stabilize, a new discomfort emerges. Without constant performance, silence grows louder. For someone accustomed to stimulation through admiration, quiet can feel threatening. There is less noise to drown out old thoughts. This stage is often misunderstood. From the outside, it may look like withdrawal or loss of confidence. Internally, it is confrontation. The narcissistic mind has long relied on movement, achievement, attention, conflict, desire. Stillness exposes what movement concealed. Memories surface. Early moments once minimized now feel heavy. The child who learned that love was conditional finally speaks. This is not regression, it is integration. Many struggle here because there is no applause for inner work, no visible proof of progress. The ego resists what cannot be displayed. Yet this is where transformation deepens. The self no longer expands outward, it roots downward. One of the first shifts is in how relationships are experienced. Interactions lose their transactional edge. There is less monitoring, less calculation. The individual may notice boredom where excitement once lived. This boredom is not emptiness, it is neutrality, a state unfamiliar to someone who lived on intensity. Intensity was mistaken for aliveness, drama for connection. When these dissolve, calm can feel like loss, but calm allows continuity. It allows trust to form without urgency. Another shift occurs in how criticism is received. Previously, even minor feedback felt like threat. It pierced the armor. Now, criticism may still sting, but it no longer defines identity. The person can separate action from worth. This distinction is foundational. Empathy deepens alongside this change, not as a performance, but as resonance. The ability to sit with another's emotion without redirecting attention, to listen without preparing a response. This capacity develops slowly. It cannot be forced. At this point, many confront regret, not guilt designed to elicit reassurance, but sober recognition. Seeing how others were used as mirrors rather than met as people. This awareness can be painful. Some turn away, others stay with it. Staying with regret without self-destruction is a skill. It requires compassion directed inward, not indulgence but understanding. The recognition that harmful patterns once served survival. Forgiveness becomes possible here, not as absolution but as release. Releasing the need to punish oneself endlessly. Accepting responsibility while allowing movement forward. Identity shifts further. The person may notice they no longer need to dominate conversations. They speak less, but with more presence. Silence becomes participatory rather than threatening. Ambition also transforms. Goals remain, but motivation changes. Success is no longer proof of existence. Failure no longer annihilates the self. Work becomes expression rather than defense. This stage reveals how deeply narcissism was entwined with meaning. Without the chase for admiration, life can feel strangely flat. Meaning must be rebuilt from intrinsic values. Connection, curiosity, contribution. Philosophically, this is a return to being rather than appearing. The self no longer depends on constant reflection. It begins to experience itself directly. Setbacks occur. Stress can reactivate old defenses. The urge to perform resurfaces. The difference is awareness. The individual notices the impulse rather than being consumed by it. This noticing creates space. In relationships, trust deepens slowly. Others may remain cautious, remembering past patterns. Patience is required. Consistency matters more than declarations. Presence proves change more than promises. For some, this journey reshapes how they view others labeled narcissistic. Judgment softens, not into tolerance of harm, but into clarity. They recognize the wound behind the behavior without inviting it into their lives. On a broader level, this inner shift challenges cultural norms. Choosing authenticity in a performance-driven environment is countercultural. It may reduce visibility. It may slow momentum. It often increases satisfaction. The question of self-worth evolves. Instead of asking, "How am I seen?" the question becomes, "How am I relating?" Worth is no longer extracted from reaction. It is experienced through participation. This transformation rarely becomes dramatic. There is no moment of triumph. It unfolds quietly. Days feel less urgent, nights less restless. The mirror no longer demands rehearsal. It becomes just glass. The person who once needed constant validation may still enjoy recognition, but they are no longer dependent on it. Praise lands without intoxication. Criticism passes without collapse. The mask, once fused to identity, becomes an option. Sometimes worn, often set aside. The face underneath feels unfamiliar at first, then relieving. This stage reveals the cost of narcissism clearly. Years spent chasing an illusion of security. Relationships filtered through self-interest. Yet it also reveals resilience, the ability to adapt, to survive, to change. Integration continues as the individual learns to hold complexity, strength and vulnerability, confidence and doubt, autonomy and connection. Life becomes less about proving and more about participating, less about winning and more about relating. The hunger that once dominated fades into appetite, desire without desperation, ambition without emptiness. This is not perfection, it is balance. The narcissistic structure never disappears entirely. It softens into personality rather than pathology. Traits once destructive become neutral or even useful when grounded. Charisma becomes warmth. Confidence becomes steadiness. Drive becomes purpose. This is the quiet victory, not being extraordinary but being real. In this reality, relationships are no longer stages, they are meetings. Two imperfect selves sharing space without scripts. The inner world stabilizes. Identity no longer fractures under gaze or absence. The self holds whether seen or unseen. This stage completes nothing. It opens life. In the final stage, something subtle but profound settles in. The question is no longer how to be admired or even how to heal. It becomes how to live without constantly referencing the self. Attention shifts outward in a way that feels unfamiliar yet grounding. The world no longer exists primarily as a mirror. It becomes a place of contact. This does not mean the past dissolves. The old patterns remain etched in memory, but memory no longer dictates behavior. Awareness interrupts reflex. The person can feel the pull toward performance and choose presence instead. This choice, repeated quietly, rewires identity. One of the clearest signs of this shift is the relationship with power. Power is no longer extracted through control, charm, or dominance. It is felt internally as agency, the ability to respond rather than react, to stay when discomfort arises, to leave without drama. This form of power is invisible but stable. Masculinity, often distorted by narcissistic defenses, also transforms. It moves away from conquest and image toward containment and direction. Strength becomes the capacity to hold emotion without outsourcing it. Authority becomes coherence rather than intimidation. There is a new relationship with failure. Failure no longer threatens existence. It informs growth. The self remains intact regardless of outcome. This stability allows experimentation, learning, humility. It removes the need to protect identity at all costs. The inner dialogue softens. Where there was once constant evaluation, there is now observation. Thoughts arise without urgency. Emotions move without needing explanation. Silence becomes restorative rather than empty. Connection deepens as a result. Conversations slow. Listening becomes genuine. Others feel less like instruments and more like realities. The individual no longer needs to be central to every interaction. They can participate without controlling direction. This capacity changes intimacy. Love is no longer a transaction of admiration. It becomes mutual recognition. Two people seen and accepted without inflation or diminishment. This kind of connection feels less intoxicating but more sustaining. At this point, the original wound no longer governs identity. It exists as history rather than destiny. The child who once believed love was conditional is acknowledged, not erased. That acknowledgement brings peace. The narcissistic hunger dissolves into curiosity. Instead of asking, "How am I perceived?" the question becomes, "What is happening here?" Attention moves from self-image to experience. This shift also alters ambition. Goals remain meaningful, but they no longer compensate for inner lack. Work becomes an expression of values rather than a shield against insecurity. Success is enjoyed without being consumed by it. From the outside, this person may appear less impressive, less loud, less driven by spectacle. But there is gravity now. A grounded presence that does not demand attention yet holds it naturally. The world responds differently to such presence. Some are drawn, others lose interest. This is accepted without resistance. Approval is no longer the measure of direction. This is where philosophy quietly enters. The self is no longer something to construct endlessly. It is something to inhabit. Identity becomes less narrative and more embodied. Less story, more experience. The paradox resolves here. The more the person stops chasing admiration, the more authentic respect they receive. Not because they seek it, but because coherence is felt. This stage is not dramatic. There is no climax. Life continues with fewer extremes. The nervous system calms. The body rests. Sleep deepens. Relationships stabilize. The mask, once essential, now feels heavy. It may still appear in certain contexts, but it is recognized as a tool rather than identity. The fear of being ordinary fades. Ordinary becomes sufficient. This sufficiency changes how time is experienced. There is less urgency to prove, to arrive, to be remembered. Presence expands. Moments matter without needing to be documented or validated. At this point, narcissism is no longer the central story. It becomes one chapter in a larger human narrative, a phase of adaptation that taught resilience, awareness, and the cost of disconnection. The lesson it leaves behind is simple and severe. No amount of admiration can replace self-contact. No performance can substitute for presence. No image can hold what authenticity provides. This understanding extends outward. Compassion grows not from superiority, but from recognition. Others are seen struggling with their own masks. Judgment softens. Boundaries remain. Clarity replaces resentment. The person no longer needs to diagnose others. They recognize patterns without fixation. They respond rather than analyze. Life feels lighter. This is not enlightenment, it is maturity. The mirror that once demanded perfection now reflects a face at ease. Not exceptional, not diminished, human. And in this humanity, something essential is found. A stable sense of worth that does not rise or fall with attention. A capacity for love that does not require performance. A masculinity that does not dominate, but grounds. The psychology of narcissism, once a prison, becomes a teacher. It reveals the consequences of confusing image with identity. It warns against building the self on applause. It points back to what endures. What endures is presence, relationship, integrity. The journey ends where it always should have begun, with the courage to exist without proving, to be seen without acting, to love without bargaining. This is the quiet resolution, not a triumph over others, but a return to self. And in that return, life opens, steady, real, enough.